am Tracy Hyder-Suffern. I am the executive, I almost forgot my title. It's been a long day. I'm the executive director here at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, and it's always my favorite part of the work that we do to welcome all of you to our space. And I always like to begin by taking a quick look around to see who is familiar to me and who isn't. And I see a lot of unfamiliar faces here tonight, which is always really good news. I like to ask, who is here for the first time? Everybody, even the one person who I thought I recognized is here for the first time. So what I like to say to everyone who is here for the first time and to people who are here for a repeat visit, thank you for coming. Welcome home. We hope that you will make good use of our space. We have a lot of really interesting things coming up, and one of the things that makes me happiest about working here is that we work really, really hard to present events in a way that other organizations are not presenting it. So you can, and not just events, but performances. So usually when you come here, you can be assured that that's what you will experience. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you also for supporting our programming. I thank you in advance if you haven't done so far. And I thank you for your support if you've already done that. It's how we survive. It's how we are able to offer almost 100% of our programming free of charge. So bring your friends. Remember to do that. Who are the artists in the room? I don't know. Perfect. I don't know if you know that we offer this space as a free rehearsal space to artists. We also offer it as a showcase space at cost. So we welcome you to contact us. Let us know that you'd like to utilize the space, and we'll reserve it for you as long as it's not already occupied by another artist or by our programming. The last thing I'd like to do is introduce to you the person who is primarily responsible for bringing you what I like to think is the most innovative programming in New York, and that is our Program and Education Director, Ryan Maloney.
Thank you, Tracy. And we work alongside our artistic directors, Christian McBride and John Batiste, to help us kind of craft what we do here at the museum. So again, I just want to echo Tracy. Thank you for coming. Thank you for hanging out. This event is really special for us. We thrive on collaboration, especially as a small nonprofit in New York City. It takes a lot to make things happen, so the more collaboration and the more kind of integrated mission-driven work that we can do with our community partners, the better. And this particular event came to us actually from a student, from a college student who we have connections with kind of through the Jazz Network, approached me and explained this project and the topic and the materials, and I said, of course, this is exactly the type of thing that we do at the museum. It's a great opportunity for us to collaborate with a young visionary person who's engaging with not only the music, but the thinking and the history and the ideas behind what makes the music special, but also what challenges we face as we as a society continue to evolve, things that we need to re-examine, things that we need to take a look at, things that we need to bring to light. And to see a young person commit the amount of time and energy into this project is really kind of warms our hearts and our spirits here at the museum. So we're going to get things started. The night will include a panel discussion. It will also include some live music. So we're going to bring out our panelists, and our curator and host for the evening is Emily Springer. She will continue the introduction. So we'll get things started. Please welcome the panelists.
Still settling in, but so good to see you all here. I'm going to introduce everyone, but before I do that, I just want to say thank you to the National Jazz Museum in Harlem for having us. Thank you to the Mellon Foundation and the Mellon Public Humanities Program for letting me do this research as an undergraduate. That's a really big deal. And of course, thank you to my faculty advisor, Dr. Kelly Nims, for helping me with this research and the paper. And yeah, so I'm going to introduce our panel to you. To my left, we have Liany Mateo. This is just a short bit from her biography. Bassist Liany Mateo has traveled across the United States, Japan, Africa, and Bahrain, performing, touring, and teaching music. Influenced by a mix of hard-hitting, straight-ahead swing, free avant-garde, and music with deep pocket groove, Mateo deems herself a chameleon, fitting into many different types of musical situations. She's performed with respected artists like Carl Allen, Brandy Younger, and is the bassist for the Grammy Award-winning Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra. She holds a jazz degree from the esteemed Michigan State University and a master's degree from Berklee's Global Jazz Institute. And just this year, she's also been selected for the prestigious Next Jazz Legacy Award. Next to her, we have Dr. Naomi Extra. Dr. Naomi Extra is a poet, writer, scholar, and cartoonist. In both her creative and scholarly work, she explores the themes of agency and pleasure in the lives of Black women and girls. You can find her work in places like the Boston Review, Zora, the New Yorker, the Lily, and elsewhere. Currently, she teaches jazz poetry at Rutgers University, Newark. And then last but not least, we have Jerome Jennings. Jerome Jennings is a drummer, activist, band leader, sideman, and Emmy Award-winning composer. Jerome earned his master's in music from the prestigious Juilliard School. In 2014, he passed Jazz at Lincoln Center's Swing University 301 History course, the most comprehensive study of jazz from a non-performance perspective. Jazz at Lincoln Center has Jerome Jennings on file as an accredited jazz scholar. He was the resident director of the Juilliard Jazz Orchestra from fall 2017 to 2021. Jerome is a pertinent performer. To date, Jerome has performed and toured as well as recorded with legendary musicians like Sonny Rollins, Hank Jones, Gerald Wilson, Chris McBride, just to name a few. So, I'm Emily Springer. I'm a senior at Hunter College. That's kind of, I don't have as many cool things to say, but I also produce for WBGO's newsroom, so that's kind of cool. And I did some really interesting research that I'm excited to ask questions about and tell you about. So before I do start asking questions, I'll just give some background. So through the Mellon Public Humanities Program, I researched respectability politics and jazz. And so what I did was kind of look at the Harlem Renaissance as the beginning of the dawning of this, and the work of W.E.B. Du Bois and how he looked at art as a tool, specifically like as propaganda for a movement towards racial uplift. And this research came from a personal place as someone who studied jazz and played. I looked around and was like, how did all my peers become white men? and you know, I really wanted to see if I could kind of track how jazz became such a respectable art form that, you know, you can go to Juilliard and study it. And yeah, so that's kind of where it came from. And within the paper, I looked at 3 musical groups or people as kind of case studies. So I first look at Duke Ellington as an example of how he was marketed as an American artist primarily, and how that works out a very respectable identity for him, and we still see him that way contemporarily, versus someone like Billie Holiday, who couldn't really live up to respectability politics because of just who she was as a person, and you know, how she was framed as a Black woman with a lot of problems in terms of like addiction and all of these things that really villainized her in the public eye. And then I looked at the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra as like a contemporary example of respectability politics, and how that can, you know, put you at on top of the jazz world. So that's a very brief overview. But what I want to do first is just kind of define respectability politics for everybody here, because it's an academic term that people might not be familiar with, and think it's important for all of us to just be on the same page. So maybe we'll start with Jerome, if that's okay. Like, what are some words that kind of come to your mind when you hear the term politics of respectability?
I mean, can we start with Dr. Extra?
Yes.
This is her. This is.
Yes, we can. We don't have to? Okay. Well, if anyone feels...
Okay.
Okay. Well, okay, so I'll just say a few things and then I'll pass it. What comes to my mind is Evelyn Higginbotham, who coined the term in the early 1990s with her book, Righteous Discontent, which is sort of about the women's movement and the Black Baptist Church and the ways in which the politics of respectability kind of emerged as a way to kind of resist negative stereotypes about Black women and about Black people. And so in that sense, it's sort of radical. But then on the other side, it also became a way to sort of police African Americans as well. Police, and often this kind of policing was class-based. So I'll just leave it there, and I can say more. So that's sort of what comes to mind. The other thing I'll say about the politics of respectability is we hear this term kind of floating around all the time, and this sort of genealogy of it is really interesting to think about, because in the context of the early 20th century, there were elements of it that were really radical. And so politics of respectability in today's context gets really kind of like a bad name, and there absolutely were elements of it that were terrible, but to actually for Black people to defend themselves against stereotypes was really important, because you could lose your life, based on some of these stereotypes. You could be killed, you could be lynched, you could be raped, and so this was kind of really important work. But we can talk about also the kind of turn that, that term has taken.
Do you want to say no? You're welcome to, no.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind is all the different identities that come into respectability, like class, race, gender, colorism, and how you might have to use all these identities to hide parts of yourself in order to adhere to a certain community. I use my experience like coming from a super urban environment. I was born and raised in Jersey City. It's one of the most diverse places in the world. So much so I actually didn't really grow up with any white people. And then when I found myself at Michigan State University, which is a predominantly white institution, I found myself, certain things about me, the way I grew up, maybe things that I was used to saying or acting were no longer accepted. And maybe were considered rude or maybe threatening, maybe the way that I presented myself, my body, my language. And in order to adhere to that environment, I had to hide parts of myself in order to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And language as well, the way you talk, it can also trigger this respectability politic. Like you just sparked something in me. My grandmother, before I went to undergrad at Ohio State, she said, make sure you learn how to talk before you go to college. And everybody's from Alabama, their country, but very intelligent. So not only language, but the way that you speak, your accent, can be triggering to people, right? So that was something that, when I think about respectability, that's one of the things as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in that because I wanted to ask, both you and Liany, as professional musicians, is there a moment where you can kind of think back to where respectability influenced your choices and how you were going to approach a person or approach a gig, just in your career? Because I think, even for me today, I thought, okay, well, what am I going to wear? I want to make sure I'm taken seriously, and I want to, make sure that I'm putting my best foot forward. But it's in theory, even if I came up here in pajama pants, I should still be able to, share a message and get across in the same way. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Yeah,
I mean, preparing for this, that was one of the things I wanted to mention. That and just, everyday life. When you hear your dad speak to his friends or his black coworkers, he speaks differently than when his white coworkers come around. It's like it's something that it's like a veil that you have to put up and down consistently. And you spoke about W.E.B. Du Bois. I mean, that double consciousness, it runs through, right? Like you have to be able to navigate different environments as a person of color, from different areas, from specific areas. So that's something that, how I would answer that question.
Yeah, like very similarly, I think like we're kind of like the first generation that has a relationship with this music that is pre-institutionalized from the very conception when we kind of, start playing jazz. And what I learned, going through these programs is like, okay, you play donor events. There's a certain way that you have to present yourself to donors in these spaces. There's a certain way that you have to speak to people. And you might be able to speak this way at home, but when you're in front of, mixed company, you might not want to say the same thing. And even the identity of being woman has really influenced a lot of the decisions I make. Like, can I wear this on a gig? Will people take me seriously? If I present more feminine, will people think that I know what I'm talking about? Which was something that I struggled with for a long time. Yeah.
One thing that you said, like, about our generation kind of coming up in jazz through institutions and how that's like a very strange thing, and that's another place that this research came from, thinking about like, jazz is a very communal and social music, and you traditionally would learn from a mentor and have it passed down in that way versus like going to a conservatory or something like that. I'm curious about, as we navigate respectability, how difficult is it to do that within these institutions that, we're all relying on and we are educated in, and, I'm very interested in that. And
it's extremely tough. It's challenging. It's almost like you're in this, it's like a quagmire, or it's tough because you have institutions mostly funded either federally, if it's a state school, or state funded, or bank run, right? And you have largely black culture being taught in an institution that's funded by entities that might not respect black people in general. So you have these instructors, which I never wanted to fall into this pitfall of an instructor that feels like they have to censor themselves so they won't get fired, teaching music that they were playing before they got the teaching gig. You understand? Mm-hmm. So it's like this, it's just, you're in this weird space of, I have to act right, but they're teaching my stuff. Stuff that I am like birthrighted into. So it's just, again, double consciousness. It's another kind of awareness. I say hustle at the house. It's another kind of awareness. When you're in school, you do it this way. When you're not in school, you can do it this way. I didn't even play the same when I went to Juilliard. And my teachers would say, man, when you're out on the scene, you play different. Why don't you play the same here? Well, I don't drive the same when the police behind me either. So it's a different thing. It's a dance. It's a dance, and everybody can't do it. Everybody don't want to do it, and
yeah.
I would just add, I think respectability politics has also influenced how we resist in this moment in particular. And if we're talking about institutions, we're seeing a lot of the revolution coming out of institutions, out of university settings. And, quite frankly, in this panel, present company not excluded, but out of panels. And, one of the jokes I was making with Jerome, I was like, the revolution's not going to be streamed. It's not going to be on a panel. And so I think one of the ways that we see respectability politics emerge is that, having your resistance tied to the university setting is a very respectable way to resist, right? And so, and if it has to go through an institution, if it has to go through a corporation or an organization, this is not to knock organizations that are doing a lot of really great work. So I want to say that. But there's a process, and there's a selection process. There's a process that you have. There's a gatekeeping process that's there. There are gatekeepers. And so I think that, you know, there are ways in which respectability politics, they're not so transparent because they're happening kind of behind the scenes through these processes of applying to things. You know, you have to, if you're gonna apply for certain programs, you have to be able to write. You know, you have to be able to present yourself in a particular way.
Right, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, the reason that I was even able to do this research is because there was a grant and a fellowship that I applied to, and you know, when I first came up with the idea, it was obviously not as fleshed out as it is today, ideally, because I just knew I wanted to write about jazz, and I knew that I wanted to find a way to kind of talk about an experience of a marginalized group playing a music that's from a marginalized group, which is like such a weird conception in my mind, and I really struggled with. And so it's really interesting to like reflect on how we're all still a part of this thing, even though we're keenly aware that it's happening. And one thing that I also wanted to ask about that this kind of reminded me of is like the idea of Black excellence, and like this term that we hear very often and, you know, isn't inherently negative. I think most of the time when we see it somewhere, it's like, oh, this person is doing such great things. We're really, really proud of them, but you know, who gets to qualify as Black excellence? And so one of the questions I had for everyone here is kind of like, how do you, or who are some people that you might think of that don't really get to fit into that mold, and like what do you think of this term in and of itself? I know a lot to think about.
Yeah. I think when I hear this term, the thing I struggle with is that idea that you have to be, when you're in these spaces that are predominantly white, that are maybe people are a certain class level, and you might be the only Black person, the only person of color in these spaces, that you are the exception to the rule. You know, and I struggle with that a lot. Is like, you know, that's, you know, you get tokenized, like, oh, well, you made it, so everyone should be able to be here. I'm like, no, like, I got here because I'm lucky, you know, or I got here because of certain circumstances. And I feel like all Black students should have the ability to have a good life. You know, you shouldn't have to be excellent to have access to resources. You know, you shouldn't have to be excellent to, you know, be in any space. You should just be able to be yourself. And I feel like that's a privilege that a lot of students of color, Black students have, institutions don't have, which is why I struggle with that term.
I mean, Jerome and I would talk about this at home sometimes, and I would say to him, you know, why do white people have a monopoly on mediocrity out here? Like, you know, I mean, can't we just live, right? And I think that's what Liany is saying. I agree wholeheartedly. You know, I think we're post-Black excellence, we're post, in some ways, Black girl magic. You mean, we heard all those conversations about Black girls just want to be like, just be like. And so I think we're in a space where, I mean, some of the activist work that I love, it doesn't involve, you know, people having to jump through hoops of excellence in order to get something, and, you know, several courses of an application. When people are hungry or they're, you know, dealing with whatever financial issues, let's just give them money. And so I'm really here for that.
Yeah, and I think the institutions, they're a safe space for folks who don't want to go through what we call the trenches. It's a safe space. I'm gonna spend some time, be comfortable in the institution. My parents don't want me playing music anyway, but at least I go to Juilliard. It's the best institution. I've seen people push their kids to make them go to these institutions so they can tell their friends that their kid goes to Columbia. It's jazz, but he's in Columbia. You know, it's really tough to incubate Black culture in these institutions and have people who come from neighborhoods like where me and Liany come from feel comfortable, you know, in that space. And I feel like it's actually designed to be that way. You have people who run these programs. I can name maybe 2 or 3 on my hand who are a person of color, who actually are musicians, who actually understand what it's like to be in the field and play, who can pull you to the side and say, don't worry, it'll be okay, as opposed to you're not doing your work, you're gonna get kicked out. It's tough. When I think about people who are navigating these environments, I give them all props who can do it and still maintain a certain amount of integrity and soulfulness. They say soulfulness up there, you know, they use that word too much. Blackness. It's tough to do it because it's really a tough dance because you're dealing with black art, you're dealing with art that comes heavily out of a black experience, but you can't be too black when you teach it.
Yeah.
How is that possible? How can I be comfortable in that environment? But I knew I had to finish so I could be heard, which is another form of respectability. This thing, it's in the fabric of everything we do in this country. It's been that way since we got off those boats. You better learn how to temper it. And I had to learn, like my grandmother, God bless her, in her own way, she was saying, you better learn how to deal with these people and deal in these circles. Because your hands and feet, it might not be enough. It can cost you your life. It can cost you your life, right? So.
Yeah, I think, well, that was amazing. But, you know, when you also think about what is acceptable to be taught in the institutions, like what parts of jazz are okay and who is not okay. And I think about, you know, I've mentioned Billie Holiday already, and in my research, I read a book by Farrah Griffin that is about, you know, Billie Holiday, and I think probably one of the best. I don't want to call it an examination because I don't know that that doesn't feel like a very human word, but like it gives her a lot of grace, and it's something that I felt, you know, to bring the black feminist element of this, like how do we really like get to reprogram and just look at people as people, like as human beings, and really see that from their music and their artistry. And so, you know, I think about people like Billie Holiday, who's had her story kind of rewritten, and we understand her in a very particular way, but there's a lot of nuance to her, and there's nuance to people like Charles Mingus, and nuance to people who, you know, we might have a combo named after them and play some of their music, but we're not gonna really talk about like their experience and who they kind of were politically or what they were dealing with. And so I just really resonated kind of like with thinking about what parts of jazz get to be in the institution. And in this research, I did look at the Juilliard Jazz program in particular, and you know, a lot of like what is called trad jazz, like traditional jazz, early jazz is very heavily influencing that program, which I think is just like an interesting thing because there's so much more. And there's a lot that is probably not acceptable, which is mostly after 1960s. So, you know, I just find that interesting. But I'll ask a question now. So, okay. A big part of this research and this panel too is like, how do we unlearn this? Like, what do we do? Like, how do we move forward? And what are ways that we can, because it's like you said, it's very pertinent in our daily lives in this society, and so we fall victim to it as well. And I think a big part of respectability is also knowing that like there were black people asking this of other black people. Like it wasn't just like, you know, oh, the man is telling it. It was very much like a communal thing. So I'm interested to like talk a little, just briefly before we maybe start the Q&A. I'm looking at the watch. Talk about like what are ways that you kind of try and remove that from your view of people and music and stuff.
I always default to Dr. Extra.
I know, I'm looking right at her.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that comes to my mind, and this is not the answer, that's what I was thinking, but of course I turn to black feminism, but I'll also say that, you know, and I'm guilty of this. So this is partially why I'm saying it, is like black feminism isn't like this thing we can just like sprinkle on things and it like makes it better. Right. And I think that, you know, even, you know, I was someone who's just kind of trying to bring a black feminist analysis to thinking about jazz and social justice. You know, black feminism is fraught, and there's plenty of dissent. But I'll say that, I still think that thinking intersectionally really helps. Thinking about like race, kind of the race, class, gender, sexuality, all these things that's sort of interlocking. And the other thing that I'll say that I think really matters a lot, this is also may not be answering your question, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Is I think, and I've said this multiple times, we need more cultural critics who are out here doing the work, who have the time to sit and think about this. And cultural critics we need more Black cultural critics, we need more Black women, we need more women of color who are doing this work that'll kind of help us to at least start a conversation to parse through some of these issues. And so, sorry.
No, that was good. I like that. I like that a lot. No, I think that's good.
Yeah, I totally agree. As far as the cultural critics, we have to have people who can teach these courses, who are they can culturally critique and also historically at the same time. To learn about Billie Holiday and her innovations as a musician, as a singer, and then skip ahead to her problems with dependency on things, and then her domestic life situation. That's the order we go in these history courses. But I like the fact, one thing that I love about Farrah Griffin's book, If You Can't Be Free, Be a Mystery, is that she does not put the blame, she does not focus a light on her, but the system that creates a Billie Holiday and her problems, the things that has happened to her. Let's talk about her record deal. What did it look like? Let's talk about her managers and handlers, which I hate that word when you're describing someone who helps an artist navigate. Let's talk about how they treated her. Let's shine light on the record labels that she was signed to. What did the deal look like? I'm very interested in these things, and these are things that I unearthed in my history class at Montclair State. You're not going to just learn about the goodies, right? The hipness, how Lester Young wore a pork pie hat and held his horn, like that's not important to me. We have to understand what was happening culturally and what was going on, what forces or power, or you know what, I'm going to quote, larger reaching power structures at play. And I think we have to unearth that and talk more about those things instead of the result of, possible result of, you understand?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we're talking about all this, and I'm still unlearning a lot of respectability politics for myself, coming out of school. And you said something earlier, like I have inherent ownership over this music, and reminding myself, like, I'm not a guest, actually. Other people are guests, and how I feel, how I interact with this music is right, no matter what lens I'm coming towards. My family's Caribbean. There's a certain way that you react to music, you dance, you speak. And for a long time, I was ashamed of that. It was embarrassing to, go to a show and maybe clap or scream if it resonated with me, because if you look at the audiences, that's not the way they're interacting with it. And reminding myself through literature, through hearing you two speak, because I know I've spoken to you both about a lot of these things, is I have ownership over this. And also just being honest, like, I can do this and it's not wrong. It's not wrong to be myself in these spaces. Actually, they've created this space to make me feel like I'm not correct.
Right. Yeah. I think that's kind of tying it back to like the institutional thing, and like, I wouldn't say that jazz was very much a part of like my life growing up, and it was always on like in the house and stuff, but I don't know that I had the relationship that I do with it today until I went to like jazz camp, which sounds nerdy, I know, but like it was a place where like everybody was kind of interested in the same thing, but it still felt weird because it was kind of like the things that feel so natural to do in response to this music were like almost like a joke to some of the students. It was like, oh, we're gonna yell now because we should, not because, oh, I genuinely feel a connection to this thing, or like this is something that is very normal, and like dancing is, don't dance, that's weird, or like don't clap, and it's like, you know, it's such a strange thing. And I feel like as more and more people, especially like our generation, like go through these institutions, so much of that gets, you know, taken away and becomes unnormal, and there becomes very few places where you can go to like listen to jazz and interact with it in a very natural, like meaningful way, which is just very strange. But I think we should open it up for some questions, if that's okay. If anyone has any questions or comments.
I have a comment.
We're going to use the mic because I know the live stream might not hear it. There's one right.
I don't know that I want to be going record. I work here. It's a comment, not a question, but
Okay.
I really would appreciate your response. This panel sounds a lot like it could be titled The Survival Politics of Code Switching, right? So all of us, one of the things I really appreciate is something that I try to do a lot on my own, and that's separate blackness from people of color. I'm always very clear about separating those two terms because the experiences are different for black people than they are for other people of color. And I hear you talking about this in the context of jazz and the context of academia, but everything that you've said shows up in the context of day-to-day survival and day-to-day life for black people. And there are and people of color. There are so many topics that were popping up and so many questions around, for example, the politics of wanting to dance and wanting to react in a certain way to something you feel in the music comes right out of the black church. And so to remove that physical and emotional response from the music is to disentangle it from its origin story. And I could go on and on and on, but those are some of the thoughts that I have.
You talk about respectability. I think it's a respect thing. I always think about it in terms of respect for black folks and black culture. And just if you're going in without that respect, everything else is going to be tainted. The fruit is just going to be, it's going to be battered and scarred. If the root is we don't respect this, but we're going to teach John Coltrane. How does that happen? I'm still trying to figure it out, through research. I'm not waiting on God, and I'm doing research to try to find this, to figure this out.
Yeah.
Power mapping.
Yeah, inherently so many of these institutions the people who are teaching these classes just have no respect for black people. No. They don't have black friends. They don't go into neighborhoods, and how are you supposed to be a part of this music in this community if you can't even look within your own self and your community if they don't reflect that?
That's what I'm saying. It's the quick way.
Yeah.
It's express lane to learning how to play jazz.
I have a comment that mainly is directed towards Jerome. I was a student at Montclair State University not too long ago, and I studied classical music, but always dreamt of switching over into the jazz department, but didn't, because I, kind of being around those students at that time did not feel right to me, and I didn't know why at the time. And I have to say, I sit back and watch on my social media and see the people that I know now who are teaching and going to Montclair State, and I just would love to say that I am so happy that you are there and that some of your colleagues who are newer to the program are there as well. I am frankly jealous that that they get to experience you and all the other newer faculty there, because as a classical major, I took a jazz pedagogy class and a jazz history class, and I could not tell you what I learned. And jazz has always been something that I loved, and everything that I learned about it, I pretty much learned on my own. And, you know, it was a white man teaching my jazz ped class, and I have a stack of paper this thick from that class that's just, who knows what it's even about. It was like, you know, so that's my comment. Thank you.
I'm sorry, sis, you didn't see yourself in that class. You should have saw yourself in that class from day one. And it's not your fault. They want to remove a certain element out of the music. And I'm so sorry. It shouldn't have happened. You should have felt welcome. You should have felt welcome. You know. It's too often we have respectability. Too often we have to come to them, even when we're dealing with our culture and our richness. We have to come into it from their gaze and not our own. And I think that's an injustice.
Any other questions? Don't be shy. We're very nice, I promise.
I didn't know what I was going to hear tonight. I was just fortunate to be in town this week and was doing research on the show I was going to see at Smoke on Sunday night, and that's how I found out about this, and grateful to be here, and grateful to hear you Sunday night. But so when I was sitting there thinking about what I could possibly hear tonight earlier in the week, this, as I said, maybe has nothing to do with what you're talking about, but especially for the musicians up there. I was so touched by that performance, and I got to see Christian McBride Wednesday night, which I had no idea that he has something to do with this organization, and it's all very just kind of blowing my mind. But, you know, as I've been watching these performances of these male musicians, I just have this, I don't know, this envy. Like, I think there's something about the female experience and the development of women and the development of relationships between women that, like, I'm not aware of that being a very normal average thing of like 4 women hanging on a stage together playing on the reg. And maybe there's just something, you know, out there that I'm not acquainted with, but really just wondering, the musicians up there, if you can speak to it at all, like, is that a thing? Are there a whole lot of female, you know, female-driven, that whole experience of just like exploring and creating music together, and being consumed and having an audience and all of that kind of stuff? That's kind of my question, I thought.
I mean, I'll say something so she can think and then have an answer too. But I think, like, just to connect a little bit to the research, like, this is very much like a racial and gender thing. Like, I hope that it's coming across that way. Like, it's very much, that's what it is. Like, it can't be separated. In terms of there being a scene for women and women coming together, I think it's complicated, but there are tons of women who are out there doing it and doing it well, and probably should have more notoriety than they do. But I also think that in recent years, it's kind of become like a gimmick to be in an all-girl band, and I've had I'm not a professional musician, but I've had male professional musicians tell me, like, man, like, you don't want to be in an all-girl band because that's a gimmick. And I do understand that to an extent, right? Because you still will not be respected in the same way. You go and see an amazing group like Artemis, who are all, you know, an all-female band and are all great as individual players, but the gimmick is to see Artemis. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a kind of like a weird thing like that, where we don't see an all-female band as a band. We see them as an all-female band. So there definitely are spaces that exist and institutions that are trying to, you know, encourage women to come and play and make safe spaces for women to do this. But I think it's become a really hot topic, like a cool thing to do. Like, we have a combo named after women, and we're getting them all together, but I don't know that it's like something that is, I don't know. I just feel like it's something a lot of people are trying to kind of hop on the bandwagon for.
Yeah, I think a lot of those projects can really lack substance because of that. you know, so often, like, as an instrumentalist, as a woman, people come up to me and the first thing they say is like, oh, I'm so happy. You know, it's not, wow, you're a great bass player. You're great. Like, wow, you're a girl. That's great. It's like, yeah, do you have anything else to say to me, you know? Which can feel really, it can feel a little cheap sometimes. Like, it's like, did you even listen to what I was doing? You know, when you saw me, did you just see girl, bass? You know, when you see other women, do you just say, oh, woman, bass? You know, where do you see me? Do you see what I'm trying to say to you? And I think even historically, like this idea of like women in jazz, a lot of these movements have catered to white women, just like first wave feminism, you know, and who have had access to these institutions, who are giving money, who are giving, you know, it's very reflective of that movement as well. I think now it's different. I know a lot of black women who play music. My friend Alexis is about to play piano with us in a minute, and we have a whole network. And if you don't see enough black women on stage, then you shouldn't be telling us, you should be telling the people who are booking the clubs, the band leader, you should be telling those people why are there not more of us? Because we can only do so much.
Sorry, I got mascara in my eye.
That's it.
I think there's one question over there.
Hi, thank you all for your insights today. I just sort of have a question kind of in relation to something that was brought up a lot throughout the panel, and that's sort of how in order to, you know, make a living as an artist, and especially someone who's specifically concerned with jazz or black music, you often have to be able to seek the support of institutions or organizations that are, you know, at times funded by donors that don't have an emotional connection to the art or to you, and I think oftentimes have made their money doing something that might indirectly or directly actually have been harmful to black communities. And I feel like you don't necessarily see that story when you see their name on like a donor list, but I feel like, you know, it is a common occurrence. And so I'm thinking, and I don't think that's like specifically in sort of the music realm, like I think that also overlaps a lot into the film industry as well. And I think even when you see independent artists making art that's, you know, that they would conceptualize as radical, I feel like it still tends to sort of stay in a certain category or be concerned with certain themes, or goes right up to a line and stops, and we're all kind of sitting in the room asking why it didn't cross that line. And, you know, it could often be because of where a fellowship came from. And so because of that, I'm just curious to hear from you all's perspective what you feel is the revolutionary potential of sort of black music today, beyond just sort of being a medium of representation or even healing to a perspective. And, you know, maybe the revolutionary potential is primarily just in the healing space right now, but I would love to just hear your thoughts on that.
That was a big question. Gonna just think for 1 second.
So that's a great question. What's your name? Peyton, that's a great question. The revolutionary potential, right? I'm gonna be really honest. The words jazz and revolution at this moment in my mind aren't going together, because I think that, I think of jazz and the jazz community very expansively. I should say that first. So there's artists, but there are many, many people, patrons. I am currently working on an oral history project that's focused on black women in jazz, that's thinking about jazz poets. So when I think the revolutionary potential is in thinking more expansively, because the musicians, there's a tremendous amount of risk when musicians buck up at institutions, when musicians buck up at managers of clubs. Y'all can lose gigs, right? But we can do, the rest of us who are in the jazz community, we can do the work, right? And I think the first step towards moving in that direction is for us to think more expansively about the jazz community and who all is in it and what we all can kind of do together, and how we can fight where musicians might not want to step to a manager at a club and say something. Us writers can, potentially, right? Some of us can. So I think that's a space. And the other thing I would say is I think there's a lot of fear. And I think a lot of that fear is connected to respectability, because respectability is really rewarded in jazz. And so I think we have to see this moment of rupture where people they just don't give a shit, you know? So that's my thought. But thank you for that question.
Yeah, just briefly, one of the first conversations that I had with Naomi, she asked me something like, who are like the people in your generation that are thinking like this? Like, who are the other people? And I was like, girl, I don't know. Like, and I didn't want to feel like defeated about it, but like, truly, when you come up in institutions and all of your peers are white men, you'll be like, hey, don't you see this thing? And they're like, what are you talking about? And you're like, okay. Like, it's complicated in that way that like, there's so many people who are keenly aware of like, there needs to be some sort of revolution through music or through, fighting against not just club owners and managers, but artist managers and all of these things to kind of turn a tide. But it's hard because, there's so much danger in doing that. Like you said, you could be hungry, you could lose your gig, you could be blacklisted, and that's it. Like it's like a very dangerous thing in that way. And I think, like you said, respectability is so highly favored that, why jeopardize it if you can kind of like stick with the song and dance for a little bit? And it's hard. I think it's really hard. Yes.
I think it's important for musicians to, be to get together with writers and other artists and folks who the risk isn't as high if they critique what's happening and communicating, right? If something's not right, it shouldn't. In jazz, it sits, and it becomes. Unfortunately, it actually becomes norm. There's a lot of traditions in this music that needs to die. There's a lot, quite a few, and because of fear, people just, they either don't say anything or they smile and laugh it off. But nothing's gonna change in that way.
What should die?
There's a fundamental disrespect for artists from artist managers. Can you make a gig on the 25th? I got to eat.
And I just have to say, in what business can you ask somebody to do work and not tell them what they're getting?
Well,
paid?
It's considered rude to ask. It's considered rude.
Honest,
Yeah.
This is labor. This is labor. These hands. I got a 97-year-old aunt who chopped and picked cotton. I talk to her every week. And she has a memory that's very sharp. She used to get asked to do things and didn't know how much she was gonna make. So where's that tradition coming from? Where's it coming from? See, I'm making connections. Can you make the gig? Well, how much does it pay? I won't call him back because he's asking, because I have the audacity to ask how much I'm getting paid for my labor. I study these drums like a person study heart surgery. Every day. Every day, it's my practice. It's what I do. It's a part of my gift to the world. It's an export. People pay me a lot of money to go to Japan to do this. But when I'm here, you can't tell me how much. And it's infectious because it doesn't just happen from musicians and people from the United States. It happens all over because, as Tracy was saying, our position as Black Americans brought here is quite unique compared to everybody else who decided to come here to find something that we were lacking. Freedom. So that's one thing. The institutions, who they decide to run these institutions under the umbrella of jazz music, which happens to be a form of black music, which is under the umbrella of black culture. But you have no experience with black communities and black people. How are you running a program?
We'll be here all
We
night.
can be here all night, sir. You're not alone, sis. There's a lot of people who went to these programs who actually can play and didn't feel like they belong.
School made me feel like if I wanted to quit jazz. If I didn't love playing bass as much as I did, there was a point where I'm like, I don't know if I can deal with this disrespect anymore. I don't want to feel. Why do I feel like a stranger and like I don't know what I'm talking about every time we bring this stuff? Why are y'all making me feel crazy about trying to read and trying to ask questions? If if it wasn't for the music, I don't know. I think that's why there's such a die-off of like young women, of so many young black people. We don't see a lot of young black people playing this music anymore, and I don't think that's a coincidence when you look at the timeline of when this started becoming normal to go to programs from elementary school to college to who's on the scene now. It's definitely not a coincidence.
Right, because it's expensive. It costs
also
a lot
that,
to learn how
yeah.
to do this and to learn how to do it well. So it's complicated in that way. But like, just like one last thing, because I want to let them play, and that'll be really exciting. You know, so much of this conversation and conversations that I've had with these people before make me feel less crazy. And that's something I talk about a lot with Liany, like, you know, as we question these things and like going forward, you really do need other people who believe in this and believe in conversations like this, which is why I'm so happy that the museum like let me do this, and you know, value the humanity of musicians and what jazz is ideally all about. So I really appreciate you guys a lot. So thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
All right, so we're gonna listen to some music, and I'm gonna ask Alexis Lombre, this amazing person, to come up now, and I'm gonna come down.
Y'all all right? How y'all feeling? Y'all okay? What's going on, Harlem? Give it up for Liany Mateo on the bass and Jerome Jennings on the drums. My name's Alexis Lombre, and I was the loud black girl in the front, amening what everybody was saying, because this panel was great. Keep that round of applause going for the panelists, because they were dope, talking about some real things. And yeah, this is a set all highlighting the, I guess, the excellence of black women. I know we talk about black excellence, how people have to be amazing in order to get the basic necessities, but these black women were literally so amazing. So the first amazing black woman we played, yeah, round of applause for amazing black women. First song we play is a Mary Lou Williams composition entitled Syllogism. And this next composition, is entitled Unconditional Love by Jerry Allen. And I just, I felt it in my spirit because we went to the Jerry Allen jazz camp together. And that was the last year that Jerry was able to teach there. So just playing this with you is actually messing me up right now. So I love Liany, it's one of my closest friends. So I'm like emotionally trying to, let me just play this song, all right. Could somebody hand me a water by chance, too? Thank you. Community care. Okay. You want to start with the intro? Thank you so much. I love playing with them. They're so good. Okay, microphone. Don't fall on me, Jesus. Okay. This last song we're going to do is one I was really looking forward to, singing the blues. Liany said, do you want to sing the blues? And I was like, absolutely. I'm so down. So this is Fine and Mellow by Billie Holiday. I'm gonna moan for a little bit. Hey, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Hey, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. My man don't love me. He don't treat me right. My man don't love me. He don't treat me right. He's the lowest man I've ever seen all my life. He wears high-waisted pants with that yellow stripe. He wears high-waisted pants with a yellow stripe. But when he makes love to me, he's fine and mellow all night. Yeah. treat me right. He's the lowest man that I'd have never seen in my life. He wears high trim pants and they're striped yellow. He wears high trim pants and they're striped yellow. Well, when he makes love to me, he's so fine and mellow. Liany Mateo on bass, Jerome Jennings on the drums. My name is Alexis Lombre. Thank you, Emily Springer. Thank you, National Jazz Museum. Thank you so much for having us.
And a big round of applause for Emily Springer for putting this all together tonight. Thank you so much. It's 8:30. It's 8:30. Tomorrow night, Sarah Serpa will be here performing at 7 o'clock. One set, hour long. It's free and open to the public. Please come back. This weekend it is sold out, but our monthly jazz and yoga program happens Saturday morning. If you're interested in that, keep a close eye on jmih.org, and you can click and sign up for any of our upcoming programs. Thank you guys all very much for coming out tonight. It was a wonderful evening. Thank you guys for your music. Have a great night. Get home safe.